Welcome to Aircrew Interview. I'm Mike and this episode is with Arnulf Hartl. Arnulf is a former German Air Force F-104 Starfighter and F-4F Phantom pilot. He mainly focuses on his time on the 104, right from training up to being an instructor. He also chats about his time on the F4 from DACT and the differences between the two types. So if you like what we do here, please head over to patreon.com/aircrewinterview to become part of the team and help us grow. And don't forget you can watch all our other interviews at aircrewinterview.tv. Thank you and enjoy. So Arnulf, when did you first become interested in aviation?
I grew up in the vicinity of München-Riem. It was the commercial airport of Munich. And I always daily saw the airplanes flying out and into the airport. And I was interested in flying and almost addicted to fly. And I tried to contact Lufthansa when I was about 15, 16 years old and checked what you have to do to become an Air Force, a commercial pilot. And it was interesting, but then I was about 16, 17 years old. The first time I saw a 104, because we were on an open day and stood on the fence and saw them taking off and landing, and I was so fascinated. And I said, okay, at that time I want to become an Air Force pilot. And that was the initial move for me when I was thinking about if this would be a nice profession for myself for the next 20, 30 years.
Mm-hmm. So what year did you join the Air Force?
I actually joined the Air Force after I decided for the officer career in 1969 in October. Started out with normal officer training. It took us, we were about over 300 young cadets, and it took us about 2 years to go also through the program to become the officer training for promotion of a lieutenant. And the last 3 months already, because during the officer training you have to decide where you want to go, and if you want to go for the pilot career, we were elected to our physicals, check if you are able, your body is able to fly and have the requirements to become an Air Force pilot. And then the last 3 months we went already during our officers training to the initial training which we did on the Piaggio 149. For the basic training, if you are able to understand, if you push the stick, that you have big houses in your view, and if you pull on the stick you have small houses in your view. And after this then we went to UPT in Shepherd Air Force Base. It took us almost 2 years, good 2 years to get to the basic jet training over in the States.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, prior to T-38 we trained on the T-37. Everybody knows it. It's always, you have a model in the back over here. You can have it seen afterwards. And at that time we were just part of the undergraduate pilot training of the US Air Force. We didn't have NGIP at that time, which started I think in 76 or 77. And that time the German government bought slots, training slots from the US Air Force. And we were together with 8, 9 students, German students, together with 10, 12 American students, and went to UPT at Shepherd Air Force Base. First through the T-37, flew about 100 hours, T-37, and then transitioned to the T-38, supersonic training fighter in tandem seats, basically a double-seater F-5. And this is one of the most beautiful birds ever built, I think, the White Angel. And and it was just a training to get routine training everybody got to before to special weapon systems. The German training was like this. You got at that time you had 2 choices for weapon system. Either you go to Luke Air Force Base flying the 104 if you graduate from Shepherd Air Force Base, or you go back to Germany and train on the G91, the light fighter bomber we had at that time in our Air Force. And it depends how you graduated, how your performance was. Mine was not too bad, therefore I was assigned to the F-104 at Luke Air Force Base. At that time we didn't have already the training where you can go directly to George Air Force Base to train on the F-4.
So after the T-38 you were moved to Luke Air Force Base to train on the F-104. What was this like?
amazing. Flying a rocket, single seat, single engine, it was just amazing. And we were soloed only after 8 missions in a double-seater. We were going solo already. Sure, chased by an instructor, but it was a program. And it was very special program. It was very challenging program. But everybody wanted to fly this bird, and then you sat down and studied all tonight to get the academics through the academics and simulated rides. And but it was really amazing because we had whole Arizona for us to fly around. Beautiful weather, beautiful aircraft, and that's it about the 104.
So how much ground school did you have? Oh,
initially, just moving back to Shepherd Air Force Base, we had about 1,500 hours academics and a total of about 220 hours flying on a T-37 and T-38. Mm-hmm. And at Luke Air Force Base, we had about 500 to 600 hours academics and 125 hours flying. All stuff you need.
Yeah. So can you remember your first flight in a 104?
Oh, it's a long time ago. Actually, yes, but we were trained in the simulator. We were well prepared in academics about the systems, the aircraft, and I went out with Lieutenant Colonel Moore, my first instructor, my Luke instructor, who soloed me. And by chance, I visited him 4 years ago. Now he's dead. He had heart cancer. He died of suffered cancer. But at that time, he still lived in Phoenix, Arizona. And I visited him. And I remember this, and we talked about, 4 years ago, we talked about our first flight. We well remembered it. For him, it was standard because he had every 6 weeks a new student. But for us, for me, and for the other students, it was an amazing moment. Fly the first time in a 104. What was very different to the other aircraft, we didn't have any room in the cockpit because it was very small. The dashboard and the cockpit itself was over your knees. Therefore, you had the straps, which for ejection, they were pulled back, that the seat go out and without any injuries. And the stick, normally you have down here in the 104, it was up here, just on the breast. And if you're sitting right, it's strapped in. And the mission itself was just a standard mission. We went out, trained a couple takeoff and landings, touch and goes, and in the area just to get familiar with the aircraft's aerodynamics. Yeah, that's it. What I remember after, now it's about 43 years.
So coming from the T-38, could you feel a difference in power and acceleration?
Yes. Even the T-38 was a supersonic fighter and had 2 engines. The acceleration on the 104 was a J79, and with a double-stage, 4-stage afterburner. We had a different version over here in Germany without any switchover. In the afterburner in our engines in Luke Air Force Base ignited, you had a couple stages and there was a switchover, and in the switchover there was almost, sometimes it was very difficult that the afterburner blow out, but in this you really feel the power. You were pushed in the back. Mm-hmm. The T-38, it was a normal acceleration, it was plugged in the burners, and the 104, if you plug in the burner, you really felt the acceleration. But only when it was cold. We had, for example, if we, in summertime, or when you had about 100 degrees Fahrenheit outside temperature, then it was a normal acceleration. Like I said, okay, where is the burner on? Look at the gauges. Yes, it is on, but you felt it. But in cold acceleration, and I experienced it over here in Jever, it was powerful. If you do it in a clean TF at minus 10 degrees centigrade, you feel the power, you get a kick in the ass.
Brilliant. So could you tell us about some of the training sorties you did over at Luke Air Force Base?
Oh, the whole spectrum we did in Luke Air Force Base. First training missions were just to get familiar with the aircraft, aerodynamics. Then we started out for air-to-air, just basic BFM, not starting out just one introduction is ACM missions, because at that time the major part when we got back to Germany was fighter bomber task. Then we get to conventional bombing, low-level training, nuclear weapon delivery training, and ended up with even with live bombing and then formation exercises, going out as 2 ships, as 4 ships. just training formation, flying with the 104 in 2 ships and 4 ships and 3 ships, and then doing tactical attacks in formation. And that's kind of a sporty thing if you fly low level and fly line abreast with 4 ships and drop napalm bombs at the same time.
So how many pilots from the German Air Force were sent to Luke Air Force Base? You
can read it on our Cactus Starfighter Squadron homepage, and I think it's about 2,200 to the whole period when the German Air Force was training in USA. Went through this training. Luke Air Force Base, I think we had, because we started out the 104 training already in Williams, in Lackland, I think. It's early, you have to read it up in the book, I don't remember it precisely. But we had, as everybody should know, we have a Cactus Starfighter Squadron, and we have now every 2 years our reunion. We still have engaged in this 800 pilots in my age, a couple of years younger, maybe 10 years older, and but a total of about, let's say, around 2,000 104 pilots were trained in the States.
So what was it like working with the Americans? Was there any difficulties there?
No, especially at Luke. It's a different thing if you are in UPT and ATC. It's a kind of flying by the book. You have to fulfill what's written in the book in the cockpit. It was different in Luke Air Force Base because of the kind of instructors we had there. These were guys who, coming back after 100 or 200 missions, survived at Vietnam. On the F-100, F-105, or even on the F-106s. And even instructor, I remember one Indian, he flew spy missions from Thailand to over China already at 58 or 59. He was an Indian, he called the Flying Indian. These people as instructors were really amazing because, sure, you have to have the knowledge, you have to know the book, but then if you're in the cockpit or if you have a chase pilot or instructor of those kind, he flew with his heart, with his brain, and with emotions and with common sense. And they taught you common sense flying a superb fighter bomber aircraft.
So can you talk us through the characteristics of the 104?
Yeah. Designed, everybody should know, was because the US Air Force lost the Korean War with the F-86s. And because they couldn't escape the SA-2s of the Soviets and the Korean. And therefore, we got the task to design. Lockheed designed a hit-and-run fighter aircraft. Fast, going high up to altitude, not being recognized by rockets, and hit your target coming back. That was the initial design for the 104. Therefore, the characteristics: fast, tiny. You don't see it. It's very, because if you see the pictures just in metal, if in a blue sky, you won't realize where the 104 is. And this was the initial RAS, and therefore it worked perfect. You needed a certain speed to get it airborne, especially at high temperatures, with configuration normally with tip tanks. In 4 tanks configuration, it was in the fighter bomber role. It was kind of different, but you had a powerful engine, so should be no problem. High speed, supersonic, perfect. Aerodynamically, very, very stable at high speed. Very, very stable at high speed and low level. It's not a bird where you want to end up in a dogfight, although you're in the 6 o'clock of your opponent, because the turn radius is not very good for a dogfight bird, but it wasn't designed for it. You see it on the small wings. It was a rocket with wing, and therefore you couldn't expect the aerodynamics. It's different to a T-37 or even a Phantom.
So I had a bit of a reputation as I heard it called the Widowmaker. Was this true?
It was, yeah, sure. It was just of the guys in the press and the officials who didn't know about the bird. And this attribute came to the bird when we had this problem in the German Air Force in the 60s. until General Steinhoff took over the Air Force. Because, and the reasons were just short to explain. The bird was a revolution for the German Air Force at that time. We had it was a present, the F-84s and the F-86s after we started again the German Air Force in 1955. And we were trained, our pilots were trained to the F-84 and F-86, just a slow bird, just an ancient bird and a very old weapon system. Then the revolutionary aircraft came and we had problems with education with the pilots. We had problems with education with technicians. We had problem to convince the politician to invest more money to make the aircraft more safe, because it was designed as an interceptor aircraft, and the German Air Force wanted a recce aircraft, a fighter bomber conventional, a fighter bomber nuclear, and an interceptor aircraft. And its 4 roles in one aircraft was designed for just a single role. It's kind of different. And it took us very hard experience. We lost about over 200 aircrafts and the total time the German Air Force flew the bird. And in the initial part, we had almost an accident. In addition, over the first 2 years, I remember we had lost about 35 birds. Yeah. And this were the reasons for it, because we had a hard time initially to get the aircraft in what you want to do it for it. But then when I started 104, all the problems were solved, because General Steinhoff was a World War II guy, flew the 262 and the burned with his burned face. Everybody should know him and remember him. And he convinced military leaders to educate, to train their personnel better than they did the years ago. He convinced the politicians that we need more money to house the aircraft, because we just came here with heavy rain, and no bases had shelter at the same time where the 104 would fit in, and they were standing out there. We had about a total of 916 104s in the Air Force as a grand total over the period we flew. And in the initial years they stand outside under rain and freezing, and the equipment suffered. It was natural, especially with the avionics, electronics. And then when these problems were solved, it took us another 3 years. Even in the Ministry of Defense had to be convinced to convince his chancellor to invest more money to get the result for a successful weapon system. And then I came in the program and I flew it, and I was satisfied. I'd never had a problem with the 104, especially with the J79. You know about it. Sure, there were a couple of critical situations, but we trained to do it, and you knew what to do it. And I actually had one case where I thought about if I need to have the ejection seat, but I was near base, then okay, I tried a landing, can do it anyway. But otherwise, it was safe. I flew 1,300 hours on the 104 without any really serious problem. And if there was a small problem, you made a safe landing or just a precautionary landing or even an emergency landing. But when you got priority and there was no problem, you were trained for it. Mm-hmm. It was just an analog cockpit, gauges overall, very tight, very small. And it was really, a standard cockpit for that time, not quite different, a lot of instruments to other aircraft. We had on the left-hand side, we had the weapon panel and the normal flying instruments on top in your view. On the right side, you had for the bombing exercises, your NWD running timer and release timer. And on the left-hand panel, you had your radio, your squawk machine. And then you have a circuit breaker panel, and we had a specialty, and I can show you. Because we had, on the left-hand side of the seat, we had circuit breakers. And if you had a problem with your external tanks, to get them on gravity feed, you had to pull the circuit breaker. And the circuit breaker was behind the ejection seat, where you couldn't reach him with your fingers. Therefore, you had this circuit breaker puller. You had it stick up in your flight suit. You put it down, and you could move back and pull the circuit breaker, and the tanks were feeding. Mm. That's to the cockpit. Oh, I was the initial tour when I graduated from Luke. I was assigned to Büchel. Büchel was fighter bomber wing number 33, and the task was mainly nuclear delivery at that time, and the secondary role was conventional bombing. Büchel is situated in the Eifel. It was basically a airbase aircraft carrier, I always say, because in the vicinity of Bitburg, Sembach, Spangdahlem, Hahn, and Büchel just in the middle of it. And that was the first 2 years I'll be there. So we had 2 squadrons, and initially I started out in the first squadron, and the routine duty was in shifts, early shift and late shift, and 4 flying periods. And we had stationed at that time at the base per squadron 24 aircraft were assigned. That means 48 aircraft were assigned, 70% has to be combat ready every day. And there we always had a flying period with 10, 12, 14 aircraft, and twice a day. Early shift started at 6 o'clock in the morning. Early briefing, weather briefing, breakfast, starting out flying time at 8 o'clock. A couple hours in the second period, when the second launch went out about 11 or 12 o'clock after the turnaround. Then you go back at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the late shift squadron started at 1300. If there was no night flying, if there was night flying, we started the late shift about 1600 in the afternoon.
So did your training in America prepare you for European flying?
Concerning the weapon system 104, yes. Concerning the weather, the infrastructure, what the airspace is, concerning the airspace, no. And therefore, everybody who came over back from Luke Air Force Base were assigned to a wing or a squadron, and then moved up to Jever, where we are presently here, to our weapons school. And this was a 3-month tour just to get introduction flights, weather flying, weather formation flying, instrument approaches, and even introduction flying to follow level in the European area.
So did you train with like other NATO types? Right?
Oh yeah, sure, a lot. It's NATO exercises, and especially with our friends. We were stationed in Germany at that time. It were the Canadians in the southern region, the Americans in the Eifel region, the Royal Air Force in the Rhine region, Wesel area, Wildenrath, Bruggen. We trained with them on a daily basis, actually, briefed or non-briefed. When we met as a fighter bomber at 104 and you saw the FGR2s out of Wildenrath, we had to get to escape, try to escape. And we had, on a routine basis, we had combined exercises where we, via telephone, where we briefed the mission, and we had to go through a defended area by FGR2s, even by Canadians, or either our air defense guys. And it was a routine basis.
So how did the 104 compare to other platforms at that time?
It's kind of a very difficult question to answer, because normally, sure, you see people compare aircraft, F4 turning rates against the 104 turning rate. Today, F-35 against an F-15 or a Raptor. Every aircraft is designed for its role. And if 2 companies, or 1 company of 2 or 3, which develops this aircraft because they are tasked to, wins it, then you have a unique weapon system. And this unique weapon system to compare with other different a unique weapon system is very difficult. You can aerodynamics compare, you can thrust and weight ratio compare, and you will have a result that aircrafts are different. But this doesn't mean that the quality of the weapon systems is different, because they're designed for a single task.
Of course, yeah. So after your frontline tour, you went on to instruct at Jever. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, why did I move up to Jever? Because 2 years flying strike, it's fun, but after 2 years, if you reach a performance level, there's no progress anymore in flying, because it's routine. Go out, fly 1 hour 50 or 1 hour 40, low level, hit a target within 5 seconds, and come back. I wanted to have a challenge, more challenge flying-wise. And therefore I thought, and I asked what would be, for my flying career, a chance to change it. Either change a wing or change a squadron. At that time, because I'm born in Munich, I wanted to go down to Memmingen or Lechfeld, doing basically the same thing, but in a different wing. But they were filled up, and they said, okay, you have the chance, go up to IEFA, be an instructor for 3 years, and go over to Luke to be an instructor. I said, okay, I'll sign in for it. But you have to have first the instructor course up here, and it was a very hard course. It took me 3 months to become an instructor. At that time I had 500 hours, almost short of 500 hours total 104 time. I was a first lieutenant, and the instructors up here were majors and lieutenant colonels, and they laughed at me when they came up here. And they said, okay, we wait 3 more months. Then I reported to my squadron commander after I graduated from the instructor course, without any pink, and the pilots know what a pink is. I was very proud of it. And then I said, okay, now I have a 3 years instructor tour up here, just to train what I told you before. The young guys coming back from Luke for instrument flying, weather flying, all this stuff. And then I go to Luke Air Force Base as an instructor, as a weapon instructor too. But being half a year over here at IEFA, I met my wife. And I'm stuck here since 40 years.
So what would you do on a daily basis? Was there different, would you get stuck with one student, or was it different students every time?
No, you just jump to another student if another IP was ill or sick or whatever. But the system was, and the idea behind it, just if you fly with one student. That it doesn't have changed the IPs and the emotions of an IP and the criteria of a different IP, because it was very, it was a challenging program to fly. Coming back from Luke Air Force Base, being just a good weather flyer, coming back to and try to land the aircraft with 800 meters visibility and 200 feet ceiling, and therefore we tried to have one student for the whole period for the 3 months.
So was the role fulfilling?
Oh, sure, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
It was a different job, like I told you before, flying a fighter bomber in a wing, routine business. But I didn't mention already up to now that we had detachments down in Sardinia, where we had to do our weapon qualification. That was the highlights twice a year into being in an operational squadron in a fighter bomber wing. Up here at IEFA, you're doing basically all day long the same thing. But there were highlights too, because we went out with a clean TF for Mach 2 runs over the North Sea. And I remember once, I tell you this anecdote, I remember once a Mach 2 run with a 2-ship, we did it with 2 ships, clean TFs, and we had 4,100 pounds of fuel on board. We stood in number 1, and we had about amber conditions, and we said, yes, we go. Tops were at 36,000 feet. We entered the cloud 2-ship formation takeoff, and the cloud go to our routine area where we do the Mach 2 run, go land abreast 2 miles, go accelerate to Mach 2, joined up again, entered the cloud at 36,000 feet again, and coming back it landed at amber. That was highlights, you know, but you could do it. You were trained for it. You did it on a daily basis. Like you did train emergency procedures. A specialty for the 104 was the simulated partial power pattern, which you have to do basically after each flight, and we trained it after each flight. That was a simulation when we had a problem with the nozzle. The nozzle was hydraulically driven by engine oil, and if you have a leak in the cut, the nozzle automatically opens. And if you caught it, that you get a nozzle failure, you have a mechanical handle. You could to get it on mechanical locks, and then you had a half-closed nozzle with about 80% of engine power, and you have a 2-to-1 glide ratio, flying glide ratio on a 104. That means if you're 20,000 feet, you could glide 40 miles to the next base, and then you trained it every day. With the point that you flew with 260 knots on the approach speed, the whole procedure, tried to hit at 1 mile 200 feet, and then land the aircraft. And if you're on the overrun, you lower the gear, and the gear, you have 3 greens, landing is assured, you touch down for an emergency. And that means you could do with an almost dead engine, land the 104. Simulated flameout pattern, we didn't do. If you really had a flameout, you had to bail out. And this was the highlights on a routine daily basis.
Yeah. So overall, did you enjoy your time on the 104?
Yes. Definitely, definitely. I'm single seat minded, single engine, single aircraft, single seat, and a single pilot. You don't need anything else. And even the constructors did it. You see, the 104 what at our time was the working horse in the Cold War in Europe, for NATO in Europe. Norwegians, Danish, the Netherlands, Belgium, Italians, Spain for 2 years flew the 104, the Turks, Greece Air Force, German Air Force. And they switched to F-16. What's different F-16? It's electric jet, another generation, but single seat, single engine. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then in 1980, your roles changed from the F4 to the F-104 to the F4.
Yes.
Well, could you tell us about this?
Definitely, because I told you yesterday that I flew 2 years as fighter bomber, then 4 years as an instructor, and then we transitioned over here. It took me a 6-week course to transition to the F4, and the crew solo after 4 flights, I think. And then it gets you to the tactical program. And the tactical program is a little different to fighter bomber job, because air to air is, I always said, just joking, it's 3-dimensional flying.
Yeah.
And it took me to get proficient in air combat, meaning doing intercepts, fighting, close dogfights and BFM and ACM missions. It took me about half a year to get proficient and to be satisfied with myself, with my performance.
Yeah.
And then at that time, because of my overall experience already, I started to train younger crews here. Not as a teacher, not an instructor, but just a tactical trainer.
Yeah.
Even to get to train them to lead a 2-ship, to lead a 4-ship. This was basically instructing. I did it on the 104 already, but flying the F4 then was it became fun after half a year.
Yeah. So was it difficult transitioning from the 104 to the F4?
No. It's basically the same. You have a higher gross rate. You have 2 engines, but flying-wise, to transition to it, aerodynamic-wise, yes, it was a little bit different, because I told you already, 104 and low-level, high-speed, very stable formation for flying, very stable. The F4 is a little different. It's aerodynamically in close formation a little more unstable than the F-104, but basically, if you fly jets, you train them and transition to them, and after 6 weeks you should be proficient.
Yeah. So can you remember your first trip in the F4?
It was an instructor trip with an instructor. The instructor actually met yesterday in the party, and it was just after 1 or 2 simulator rides, I think, we went out, normally strapped in the cockpit, and he briefed the mission, what they had to do. Basically, because to start up the engines, it's different, the ground procedures are different, but this was okay. And and then we went out in the area and did just familiarization with the aircraft handling, basically. A little aerobatics, and then coming back to the base and just did a lot of landings, single engine approaches to get familiar with the aerodynamics and with the handling of the aircraft in the landing. Basically, if you could go safe out, you have to go safe back. That was the first mission.
So, like you say, the Phantom was both air to ground and air to air.
Yeah.
So what was it split 50-50?
No. For us in Wittmund, at that time when I arrived here, we were back to the first 2 years we still were on a tactical fighter program, but then we went back just to strictly air defense. And during this period we had both roles. It was about 30 to 70%. 30% air to ground, 70% air to air.
So how did F4 fare against like the other NATO types at this time?
Sure, it was still a 2nd generation aircraft, and at that time already F-16s and F-15s were airborne, and we had no chance against them during fighting, not only in dogfights, in close interfights, even with the weapon systems, because F-15 had radar missiles, the F-16 is better in turning rates, and it's tiny and smaller. And therefore we started out the MFFO operation. That means Mixed Forces Fighter Operation. That means 2 F-4s went out with 2 F-15s just to escort them. And the F-15s brought us in the weapon range with their capabilities. And that these are friends from Sösterberg and even from Bitburg down, the Americans were stationed here in Europe. We flew a lot of sorties with them, even on a scheduled program. And it was very fun.
So what weapons could the F-4 carry at this time?
You see it on this bird. You have seen the 4 M9 Lemurs. That's just the air-to-air weapon. And we have this revolving Gatling gun, 20 millimeters, in the nose of them. It was very effective. This is basically the same gun like in the 104.
Yeah.
And that's it for the German F4 in the air defense business. Air-to-ground business, you could put the same like in the 104, what we had in stock on weapons. It was cluster bombs at that time. There were Mark 84s, I think, and and rocket pods.
Yeah. So could you tell us some of the strengths and weaknesses of the F4?
There is none, actually. Weaknesses of the F4, I don't remember. I remember even one case where, like Mufti told us, with double engine over the water. I remember one incident when we were scheduled for a supersonic intercept against a standard weapon carrier, simulated standard weapon carrier, about 100 miles on a TQL, 100 miles over the North Sea. And we run in with supersonic. We were cleared at that time down to 500 feet over the sea, and run in supersonic, zoomed up, killed it was actually an AWACS, rode in a circular pattern, killed him, and the AWACS was defended by F-15s. They never found us because we zoomed up, hit and run tactic, and we went back supersonic and digged out. And suddenly my backseater said, "Oh, watch, we have master caution light." And I said, "Okay." I looked at the panel and I didn't see any lights on it. I said, "Okay," pressed on to look out and check the F-15, not get him at 6 o'clock. And he said, "Okay, the master caution light is still on." And then I looked further down and there were 2 generator lights. And 1 generator light was on. That means 1 engine was not running.
Oh.
And it was the outside engine because it was an aerodynamical flame out. I got on a supersonic intercept in the right turn, going down again. I didn't realize that I'm flying on 1 engine in Abia only. I just hit the ignition button and the engine came on again. But that was really amazing for me, not to realizing at very high speed that it performs with 1 engine the same like with 2 engines.
Yeah. So you mentioned a backseater there. Was it hard transitioning from a single seat to a 2-seater?
It took a while to get used to it, that you had somebody in the back is talking to you. That was just, but it's like Mufti told us already, it was necessary because the weapon system was designed for, and to fulfill the task, it was necessary to have 2 people on board.
Mm-hmm. So could you describe the cockpit for us? Was it a lot different?
Actually, no big difference. Just due to 2 engines, you have 2 throttles and 2 ignition buttons and 2 starter engine master switches. Basically, this instrumentation was always the same. The HSI, the attitude indicator, was a little better and built a little larger, and then basically always the same cockpit.
Yeah. So could you tell us a bit about the squadron you were based with?
Yes, I started out in 712, the Bloody Who, we heard yesterday. And after 1.5 years, I went over to the 711, the Kings in Heaven, over here in the building where we are standing now in this area. And after a couple of months, or I think, I can't remember, half a year or even 1.5 years, I became ops officer. As I told you already privately, that I was in a career to become a career officer. That means you have to go to staff and all this stuff. I didn't want to do it, and when I was asked to become a squadron commander, I refused because I wanted to fly anymore and didn't want to move due to private reasons. And then I became an additional ops officer until my end of the flying career.
Yeah. So, did you ever fly on any exercises?
Yeah, sure. We had a lot of exercises scheduled by the German Air Force. We were every year for a detachment down in Sardinia, in Decimo Mano, flying DACT against Harriers, FGR-2s, F-15s, Italian 104s, Canadian F-18s, and the aggressor squadron from Elconbury. That was for air defense training. That was basically local exercise from just transferred to Decimo Mano. Then we participated in TLP, Tactical Leadership Program. Then we participated in any NATO exercise European-wise, even when the guys came over from the States and flew missions with us. And besides a routine exercise training flight every day, we had about 3 to 4 big exercises in 1 year period.
So how many hours did you get on the F4?
Actually 1800 and a couple minutes, That means 3,600 hours J79. In addition to 1,300 hours J79 on the 104, 4,900 total J79 hours without any problems.
So overall, did you enjoy your time on the F4?
Definitely yes. Story on the 104, I remember very well. I also was at Jever base, ops officer, and on a Friday noon, when the second period was launched, I got a phone call from my senior ops officer, and he said, "Arnulf, we have a medical not an exercise, a real sortie to fly. You're the only pilot available, and just get ready to fly. We have one aircraft out on the apron already, getting serviced for the flight." And it was a heart pacemaker coming by helicopter from Hamburg, from a hospital, and was scheduled to be at Kaiserslautern, Landstuhl, that's the American hospital near Ramstein. And I was scheduled for the sortie to fly from Jever as a medevac aircraft to Ramstein, and I was cleared to go supersonic. That means normally when the helicopter was landing beside my aircraft, my engine was running already, they put the pacemaker, just a box like this size, in the E-compartment behind the cockpit, and you could pull about 3 or 4 computers. One computer I didn't need for this flight was pulled, and they could pack in the pacemaker, closed the hatches, and then I went out to number 1, plugged in the AB, and about 80 to 90 miles south of Jever Air Base, basically same south of Wittmann Air Base, I came out of AB, 28,000 feet, supersonic Mach 1.8. I cruised about for 20 minutes and landed after a total sortie time of 35 minutes at Ramstein. Just at the end of the runway was a helicopter beside me, and I pulled out the pacemaker, get it to the helicopter to the hospital. It took the whole mission for the pacemaker, it was ordered at 11 o'clock in the morning, and 14:30 in the afternoon it was at the patient. That's a 104 story, yeah.
That's a brilliant story. So do you have any more stories?
Yes, I remember another one. It was very interesting because I was sitting on QA here at Wittmundhafen, and we had normally 3 training flights per day. And on one training flight we were scrambled out to the North Sea, just doing exercises, intercepts, and suddenly CRC told us, okay, we have to identify an aircraft coming from the north, low and fast. And I said, okay, is it interrogation or no, just identify. Okay, we backed out, we got vectors to the target, and finally my backseater picked him up very low, very fast, on the radar. And what the result was, we met a B-52, 500 knots plus at 500 feet MSL. You know, and the B-52, it flies fast, it's like this. Okay, we did the normal procedure, one on the left wing to show up, and the second guy in shooting position behind the B-52. Then CRC told us, when we identified B-52 heading and altitude and speed, then CRC told us that the boss of the B-52, the captain, wants to have us on his frequency. Then we switched to the frequency of the captain, and the captain said, okay, I can't see you, you're too far away from me, flying his left wing. And then you might come closer. I said, okay, you flying at 500 feet, 500 knots, I don't go under your wing. He said, okay, come on top of my wing. And I came actually on top of his wing, about 50 feet, 60 feet above him, close to the cockpit. We waved our hands together, and then he said, okay, show me your belly. And I showed him his belly and said, okay, now I'm satisfied, you are actually from QA, you have missiles with you, you're dismissed already. And I pulled off, and then we got back to it. When we landed, CRC was telling us that it was a B-52 on a mission around Europe. He was coming air refueling from the States, went low level over UK, out to the North Sea, low level to Germany, through France, through Spain, and after the Spanish border he went up again on the tanker and back to USA. It was an exercise mission for them, for the crew. Yeah. And it was very interesting and fun with him for flying together. Closest formation we were able to with a B-52 oversea at 500 feet, 500 knots.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So Arnulf, do you have any hobbies?
Literature. I read a lot, try to write. And my family. music, and yeah, celebrate tradition.
Do you have a favourite tipple?
It's Jever Pils, and if it's not available, a double-sized single malt.
Very nice. Do you have a favourite aircraft?
104, like you see over here.
Is there an aircraft you wish you could have flown?
F-15.
F-15?
Yes.
And finally, do you ever get sick of talking about aviation?
Review the interview and you will have the answer. No.